Saturday. And then we have our First Lady, my wife, Casey. Now, most of you know who've been living in Florida for a while that, over the last 4.5 years in particular, we had a lot of fights about rolling back these medical authoritarian mandates and ensuring medical freedom. There was all kinds of debates. I mean, I remember when I said you should not force kids to wear masks in school. And so some people thought that was like how could you say that? Well, because it's true, right? And so we had to fight that. We had to say parents have a right to make what their kids do is up to the parents. You shouldn't be forcing this. You should not have situations where local governments are able to fine you. They wanted to fine for not wearing masks. I said no. We pardoned everyone who they did initially. We said you can't do it. There were things about just being able to operate businesses. Fauci, he hated restaurants. He didn't want these restaurants to operate, and we really stepped in and saved the restaurant industry in Florida, and they did really, really well as a result. But I used to think about it. I just got a kick out of it because they would say you can't eat indoors. And so what they would do in places like Chicago, they would set up tables outside on the sidewalk. Sometimes the city would even close streets, and you would do that, which is fine if that's what you want, and maybe that's fine in August, but it gets cold in those places. And so once the temperature started dropping, instead of just saying, okay, you can come inside and eat, they said, nope, you got to be outdoor dining. So they would build covers and like these enclosures. So it's literally like this thing, and it's like it's enclosed, but it's outdoors, so somehow that's safe. And I'm just thinking to myself, this is crazy. I mean, what they're doing is crazy. So we were really, I think, a voice of sanity. We made sure that people were able to make their decisions accordingly. We were the first state in the country to ban so-called vaccine passports during the early days of COVID. It was once the mRNA shots were emergency use at the end of 2020. Then we get into 2021, and people like Fauci were urging that you had to show proof of vax to be able to go to restaurants, movie theaters, and to basically be able to participate in public. And we said, hell no, we're not doing that. Now, we got criticized because they said, who are you to tell a private business, what they can do or not do? And the reality is you either have rights to participate in society or not. And are we going to let corporate America do the bidding of Fauci, which is not necessarily enacted by Congress, but they're basically doing what CDC and these agencies were telling them to do? No, we're going to support your individual right to make these own decisions. So we were able to do that. We also made sure that they could not do COVID shot mandates for the schools. Of course, we said you can't mandate masks. And as well, we've since then said the same thing for just society, that in Florida, they can't force you to muzzle your face. Like, that's your first of all, it didn't work. I mean, let's just be honest with that. And Joe was one of the first who was saying this years ago that putting a piece of cloth is not going to stop a very contagious respiratory virus, which is like much smaller than the pores in the mask anyway. So like the science of it didn't even work, but it was more of an ideological thing. So we led on that. We were also the first state in the country, and we worked with the legislature to get this. We have banned any imposition of, they want to impose different things, and our view was obviously the state wouldn't back that. But if they're implementing this, if you have a federal administration like we had under Biden that would do it, would locals put it in? Some others put it in. And we just said, no, we're not doing it. They want to do I guess it's like a lockdown treaty with the WHO, and it basically would cede power from states for sure, but even our country to a bunch of unelected bureaucrats. And President Trump has pulled us out of the WHO. It's really a corrupt organization and very much in the pocket of China. But we did this 2 years ago where we said no to the WHO, and so that was really, really good. We also had a situation where, as we got into the fall of 2021, you started to have so remember, Biden, when he came in as president in January 21, he says, will you mandate it? He claims, no, we're not going to mandate it. Well, then, like 6 months later, they started to say mandate. They mandated it in the military and kicked a lot of good people out. And then they said, you have to, if you're OSHA, you have to get it for private sector. And then they did through CMS. They said nurses and doctors had to get it through that. And that was something that we were very much opposed to, because we understood, first of all, how crazy is it that they were saying you needed to get this shot even if you had already had COVID? There's something called natural immunity that they refused to recognize. So it was not based on evidence. And so you had this movement to do it. And then I remember when we had the Delta, so you had the normal, then Delta came. And so I set up all these monoclonal antibody clinics. People could just go and get the monoclonal. Honestly, it cured COVID, essentially. We saved a lot of lives from it, and people are very thankful. But how did Biden react then? They saw how successful it was. They took all our monoclonals away from us. You know, the fall of 2021, they took the monoclonals. I had to do a separate deal with GlaxoSmithKline to get their monoclonals. Then when the feds found out there, they did an exclusive deal with GlaxoSmithKline, so we couldn't get any more. And then they basically just shut us off from them. So you see, but they were mad about us doing the treatment because they said, well, if people know there's a treatment, then they're not going to be going to get the mRNA COVID shots that you're doing. So the movement was to have the private sector mandate, have some government agencies mandate this. And, you know, I had a lot of people come up to me. They had a job. They needed to put food on the table. They did not want to do the COVID jab. Most of these people, honestly, had already had COVID anyways, but a lot of them didn't think it was the right thing for them. And so we did a special session of the Florida legislature in the fall of 2021, and we enacted protections for people in the state of Florida so that no one had to choose between a job they needed and a shot they didn't want. And we saved thousands and thousands of jobs and livelihoods as a result of doing that. It really was the right thing to do, and we're glad that we were able to do that. So, and then there's other things we did as well. But what brings us today is, one, the protection against these mRNA shot mandates that we did enact during that legislative session. And I don't know why it happened at the time. It wasn't something that I was pushing, but they put in there a sunset provision. And so in June, the protections that you have against these mRNA mandates, being a Floridian, those protections will expire unless the legislature acts to make them permanent. So I'm here as governor endorsing making these protections permanent. You should not be forced to take an mRNA shot against your will. And that should be the right of every Floridian. This will also, if the sunset happens, it will also allow schools and higher ed to be able to institute some of these mRNA mandates. Now, most schools by now, people have been upset about it, so a lot of them have not done it. Now, Florida, we said you couldn't do it from the beginning. Most schools were doing it back in 2021. Now fewer are doing it, but you know, you never know with how these folks do. And then, of course, government entities and the businesses, you need protection for that as well. You know, I'd be talking to like these firefighters. You know, these guys have been like on the front lines, like, and during COVID, they were doing things to help people. Many of them got exposed. That's just part of the job. They did it. And they didn't want to take mRNA. And so they were going to lose their job. It was like a big contest, I remember, for some of these. We of course, did the law, which was good. But leading up to that, there was a lot of people that were really concerned about what could happen. And it rattled a lot of folks because it's like, you know, you work hard, you do all this, and then what? They're just going to cast you aside just because you had a disagreement on whether this was the right thing to do for you. And so we're really glad that we did that, but we got to make that permanent. I mean, we cannot allow those protections to evaporate. I don't know what would happen immediately if they evaporated. I don't know what the mindset is in some of these areas, but I think what we saw during COVID is things can hit the fan very quickly and people can lose rationality very quickly. And that's what a lot of this stuff was based on. Some of it was a power trip. Some of it was based out of fear. But some of it, I just think, it wasn't grounded in sound logic and evidence. And that's why we had some of the things that we had. You actually, this has just flourished me. So California, of course, they were very strict on you have to take the COVID shots if you want to be a nurse. Now, there were a lot of nurses who, they had COVID when COVID first started, before there was even any shots available, right? And so they had natural immunity. They didn't want to do it, particularly some of the younger women. They didn't want to do it. And California said, no, you got to do it. But what ended up happening is they laid those unvaccinated nurses, many of whom had natural immunity, but they laid them off. And then they had a spike in patients, and so they were shorthanded. So did they bring back the unvaccinated nurses, many of whom had natural immunity, put them in there so that they could service patients? No, they refused to do that. What did they do instead? They actually brought in currently infected people to serve who had been vaccinated but still caught COVID, and they're putting them in. Now, that is the most bizarre thing you can possibly do, but it almost became a religion. So we need to make them permanent. I don't know what the future holds, but I know people should be able to control their own destiny with respect to these mRNA shots. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, and Joe's going to talk even more broadly about the role of these mRNA COVID shots with respect to little kids. There is no evidence to support jabbing these babies with COVID mRNA shots. There's no justification that's been offered. There's not evidence that supports it. And yet, the CDC has put COVID mRNA shots on the childhood immunization schedule. We are asking Secretary Kennedy, obviously you're going to have a new CDC director soon. We are saying you must remove the COVID mRNA jab from the childhood immunization schedule. There's not a basis to do it. And I know there's a lot of people who talk about potential side effects and all that, and I think that is a debate that people need to have, and the evidence on that needs to be put. But you don't even have to, on this, you don't have to get there, because they can't show benefit. So why are we saying these babies should be getting this if they can't show benefit? So what it's done is it's further eroded the credibility of the CDC when they add that to the childhood immunization schedule. Now, I do think that they're going to overhaul that. I think it's been a huge mistake for them to do it. And, these parents, like, they're told you do it, but most parents, certainly in Florida, are not doing mRNA shots for their newborns or for their young kids. I mean, it is a pretty strong minority that are doing it, but it's still being pushed. And when the CDC does it, the way our medical establishment operates, then people just parrot it, and they say, you got to do it, you got to do it. I think we've seen over the last 5 years, the emperor really has no clothes. I mean, they're operating in many instances with really a lack of data, or even contrary to data, and instead trying to pursue a narrative. Now, I know they're going to clean that up under the Trump administration, but we need to get moving here with this. This is an easy layup to start, and I know Joe we're the only state. Are we still the only state that says that our recommendation to parents is not to do the mRNA shot for the kids?
I think we are.
Yeah, so I think we're the only one. Maybe another or two have done it, but Joe came out very early on this and said that. He was attacked for it, but if you look at the data is what it is, and he wants parents to have that. But I think there's a debate about just the viability of those even being available. I know Joe's going to talk about that. The other thing we want to do in working with the legislature is to add vaccination status protections to our Patients' Bill of Rights. It is unfortunate that in this country, we don't think in Florida, but it has happened in this country where people have been denied transplants because they did not have a COVID mRNA shot and booster. Now, how sick is that? Somebody needs a kidney, you're not going to let them have it because they didn't do an mRNA shot, which, by the way, doesn't even work, really. I mean, maybe it works for 3 months, and then the efficacy just goes in the toilet after you do all these booster shots, and yet people are being discriminated against because of that. Now, we don't think that that's necessarily going to Florida, but we want to make it very clear that you don't do that. So also, you'll have pediatricians, they won't accept your kid unless you do all these shots, including the COVID shot. So think about that as a parent. You know, you want to be able to have somebody to look at your kid, to do the checkups, and then they're saying you have to do this because CDC says, but then you know there's no evidence to say that that should happen, and so you don't want to do it, but then all of a sudden, okay, well then you can't go continue on seeing this physician. That's discrimination, and that's wrong. So we don't want Floridians to be kicked out of a doctor's office, denied treatment, or anything because they have made this decision on whether or not to take this vaccine or that vaccine, especially given the role that natural immunity plays. I mean, even people that were supportive of mRNA shots back in the day, if they had already had COVID, there were a lot of people that said, hey, if I didn't have COVID, maybe I would take it, but I've had it. And I have natural protection now, and that's been true of every respiratory illness. I mean, in human history, don't you get sometimes? I mean, there may be some examples, but it's like this is not like cutting edge thing to say that you gain protection by doing that. So we want to update Florida statutes so that we're able to prohibit both providers and facilities from discriminating against patients based on vaccination status. And there is this story from Indiana, denied a spot on the heart transplant list because she did not get the COVID mRNA shot and she didn't get the flu shot. That's a whole nother thing, this flu shot. I mean, you know, how effective that is. I mean, it's just, when I was in the military, they forced us to get the flu shot. Now, I was not necessarily somebody that had studied this like I've studied it now. You know, by the time I was long out of the military, but I was governor, obviously, when COVID happened. You know, if I had been active duty and they wanted to do the COVID mRNA, you know, what would I have done for that? And I don't know what the answer is, but I know they used to jab you with this flu shot every year, and you just go get it. You got to get your flu shot. You got to get your flu shot. You know, maybe Joe will speak on that, but I mean, doesn't exactly have a stellar record either with efficacy. And the question is, okay, well, why is this stuff being pushed on the society? Well, because people make money off of it. I mean, that's why it's being pushed. I think we all know that. Now, RFK Jr., he really wants to break up this unholy alliance between the regulators, the bureaucrats, and particularly the pharmaceutical industry. And I think it's tough, but I think he has the mindset to do it. But it needs to be done because so much of what is happening really flows from a lot of these financial incentives. We're concerned, and maybe Joe will talk about how physicians are compensated by pharmaceutical companies, and so they're pushing like a vax or a treatment or something, and then what's the financial ties kind of behind that. And this stuff has grown up a lot over the decades, really, but certainly in the last 10, 20 years, it's been a big, big problem. So to me, this is a no-brainer to say, you know, if someone needs a heart transplant, you know, how callous of it to say, well, you didn't get a flu shot, so we're not going to give you an opportunity to save somebody's life. It just shows the priorities are just so skewed. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do this, get these protections into law. It's really important for a lot of Floridians. Ultimately, we believe that some of the advice that's come down has been suspect, to say the least, and you certainly should have the ability to make a different decision than what the medical establishment is telling you must do. So let's get to work on that. I look forward to it, and we're going to hear from some other folks. We're going to start with Dr. Ladapo. Then, after we hear from Dr. Ladapo, we're going to hear from the Wilsons, Ryan and Cassie. So Joe, come on up.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. This looks like a cool place to be. We live, my wife and our boys, we're not too far away from here in St. Pete, and we've gone to a few places in Tampa, but we haven't been here. But this looks like it's probably a pretty happening place when it's open to people. So the governor's covered a lot of very important things, and I mean so many topics. And I was thinking about what I should share, what I wanted to share with you all. I think actually one of the things, the first thing I want to share with you all is just a demonstration of the importance of leadership and the, first embodied by the governor. Just do the thought experiment for how these last few years would have been from the first time that, that virus escaped or, however it got out of Wuhan and made its way around the world, to how the world shut down and how we had this hegemony of medical authoritarianism that just came over all the world. It wasn't that long ago where in most states in this country, and certainly where I lived at the time at UC in Los Angeles as a professor and a clinical researcher, where like going to get smoothies. I remember early in the pandemic, I have 3 boys, and lots of energy. There was this whole stay-at-home thing was never going to work out as soon as they said it. And I took them to the park, Barrington Park down San Vicente in West LA, and unfortunately we were often the only people there. And our tradition was to go get smoothies afterward. And I remember we walked into our smoothie place and here in West LA, and we go in there, we buy the smoothies, and we want to sit down. And the owner, nice guy, he says, I'm sorry, you have to sit outside. And there was no one else in there, but that was the rule at the time in Los Angeles. You couldn't eat inside. And I was like, this is so stupid. But we sat outside, we had our smoothies. And so the world can be, there's just, there is so much suffering that happens in this world because of bad leadership, because people aren't courageous enough to do the right thing. The consequence of that is suffering, and there's so much of it. I see here one of your commissioners who actually led an effort here in Tampa to actually get the extra fluoride out of your water here in Tampa, and it was a close vote. Yeah. It was a close vote, and I've been in many of these meetings. Unfortunately, I think it was a tie vote, so the motion to get it out of the water didn't pass. But you look at the folks who so often, and I'm not judging anyone or anything like that. I want the best, but we have to talk about these things to get to a better place. You look at the commissioners who, not only in Tampa, not only in Hillsborough, but all over the state. Fortunately, most commissioners have made the right decision. But if you look at the commissioners and you listen to their words, it's a lot of hemming and hawing. It's a lot of not wanting to make the wrong decision and not wanting to be out front. Well, when it comes to right and wrong, it's extremely important to be out front. People suffer when you are unwilling to go with what you think is the right thing to do. When you choose fear and sort of compliance in the shadows, right? And waiting for someone else to make a decision over going with what you think is right, people suffer. And thank the Lord and thank God, thanks, and the world is thankful that this man here, he didn't choose that path. Is Governor DeSantis the only one who, of all the governors in the country, who knew that these policies didn't make sense, that lockdowns would be harmful, that that sort of all these business closures and keeping kids out of school and forcing poor little kids who want to play outside to have something over their face? Was he the only one who knew those weren't the right decisions? Of course he wasn't the only one who knew those weren't the right decisions. But he, instead of hiding, right, behind uncertainty and behind doubt and behind, I don't want to go against Dr. Fauci or, these other doctors, and I don't want, I don't want that anchor on, I don't want CNN to be calling me a misinformation spreader and science denier and all. I don't want that. So, I'm going to play it safe. Thank the Lord, thank God that we had one governor in this country who said, right? How many jobs were saved? How many kids are going to live better lives because they didn't fall years behind in English and math like kids all over the nation did, right? Their lives are better. Their lives will be better. How many young people who had dreams that were dashed In all these other states, New York, California, Washington, Virginia, where lockdowns were long and they weren't able to pursue what they wanted to do academically, athletically, career-wise, right? Those lives are changed forever because people didn't have the courage to do the right thing. And here the story is the opposite. The lives are better, right? People are happier. The economy's better. Much less suffering, much more promise, much more hope, because he said, I'm not going to hide behind what everyone else is hiding behind. I know that this is wrong, and I'm going to say something. And he took a lot of heat for it. He took an unbelievable amount of heat for it, but he stuck with it. And every single person in this state, in the future of this state, is better off for it. So leadership matters. And unfortunately, I think the governor, he's been doing it for almost 6.5 years now. So he's probably, he's coming toward the end is sort of kind of in sight. It's still a good long runway. But leadership matters for what happens next too, right? This stuff, please don't take any of this stuff for granted. The wonderful things that we enjoy in this state, the things that we've been able to create, take none of it for granted, right? As the governor said, it just takes, what hits the fan, and then you get to see what people are made of. And unfortunately, most people aren't made of stuff that's going to really save you in those situations. So I urge you to really keep that in mind as we think about what happens next after Governor DeSantis, the first Governor DeSantis, ends his term. So just keep. I just want you to keep that in mind. So we were talking about. So one of the things that again, just in this same stream of thought with stuff hitting the fan. I mean, I was reading this article. We have these measles cases in Texas. We actually have a case now in Florida, and there may be more of them. And obviously, we wish the best for everyone's health and all that. But I was reading this article written by some physician leaders out in Texas, and these docs are moaning and groaning about how these communities, there's all this misinformation out there. Everyone should be taking the measles vaccine. Like, what's going on? Why is my job so much harder because of all this misinformation? I'm reading this, and we need permanent protections because these are the same people that tell you that boys can be girls, that men can be women, right? That an experimental vaccine that children do not need is actually something that's critical to their health. That you need 1 or 2 or 3 masks depending on what time point in the pandemic you look, right? I mean, these are the same people, right, that have been for all these past years, all these terrible lockdowns, that we would have been better off. I would bet my life we would have been better off if we had done nothing and allowed people to do what they wanted in March of 2020 than all the nonsense that followed afterward. I have no doubt that we would have been better off as a nation. So all of these people with one terrible mistake and judgment call after the next, like for years, and now they're mad at people who don't want to listen to them. I mean, I'm reading this and I want to my brain's hurting. So, this is why this stuff needs to be permanent, because when what hits the fan, haven't learned a thing, right? They're still writing these articles, defending these ridiculous positions, and completely completely with amnesia about the ridiculous things that they've done all these past years. So it is important for these protections to be permanent. And then in terms of the kids, I'm grateful to the governor. I'm completely with him that the COVID-19 vaccines should be pulled off the child vaccine schedule. I mean, it's completely insane. Fortunately, 90%, 85, 90% of parents don't need me to tell them that. They've opted to not give them to their kids. But symbolically, it's just it's an insult. It's a slap in the face to every American for that to be on the schedule. And frankly, their authorization should be pulled. Like, they shouldn't even be given to any kid. There shouldn't even be that option to give it to any kid. Even in the clinical trials, part of this misinformation, all these lies have been provided they've been sold to Americans. If you look at the clinical trials, right, it's highest quality of evidence because they're randomized. That's the highest quality of evidence that we have. How many times did Dr. Fauci mention to you that if you looked at Pfizer and Moderna clinical trials of the COVID-19 vaccines, that the kids in the placebo groups who didn't get the COVID-19 vaccines were 3 times less likely to get bronchitis and pneumonia? So in other words, did they get less COVID? Yeah, sure, for the short time period of the trial. By the way, none of them got sick in these clinical trials, whether they got COVID or not. But the other thing that happened is that the kids that received the COVID-19 vaccines got more pneumonia and bronchitis, 3 times higher the rate. That's very disturbing, right? It's one more bad thing about these COVID-19 vaccines, and the reason they shouldn't be used for anyone. They really shouldn't be used for anyone. So my hope is that Secretary Kennedy actually works with his colleagues at the FDA to pull the authorization for the childhood COVID-19 vaccines. It should not. It is harming kids to give it to them, and it shouldn't happen. Finally, I want to say that in terms of the Patient Bill of Rights, I'm extremely happy about this. I know there are going to be moms and dads across the state that are happy about this. I will tell you, all of these pediatric practices that say, you know what, if you don't follow my vaccine schedule, don't bother calling. We don't want to see your kid. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to have a conversation. So let me tell you, right, that as a physician, one of the things that is central, right, it's one of the things you learn to the practice of medicine is something called informed consent, okay? And it's a fundamental tenet of ethical practice of medicine. And we can look back at some of the horrible things that happened during World War II, for example, and these concentration camps and some of the horrific things that physicians did to poor Jewish people and other people in those concentration camps to see that medicine and healthcare has needed help in the past. So with informed consent, I cannot obtain your informed consent. You cannot give me your informed consent. I coerce you, right? If someone holds a gun to your head and tells you that, talks to you about a medication, whatever that medication is that they want you to take, you can't provide informed consent, right? There's a tremendous amount of coercion in that interaction, okay? And it is unethical. It's not like gray zone. It's unethical to provide a treatment without being able to do it in a setting of informed consent. So what these pediatricians are doing, and other types of physicians, but particularly the pediatricians, what they're doing when they have these policies, then they tell parents that if you do not take these vaccines that that are on the CD's schedule, I will not see you or your kid in my office. They have created a dynamic where it is impossible to obtain informed consent. It is impossible to practice ethical medicine because they are using coercion. It is unethical. I am super happy about this Patient Bill of Rights. Every Floridian deserves it. That use of coercion, whether it's vaccines or whatever the hell, pardon me, or organ transplants, whatever it is, it has to stop. It is completely unethical. So anyway, thank you very much thanks for your attention, thanks for your time, thanks for your thoughtfulness about where we're going next as a state, and let's keep Florida just a shining example for the country of how good things can go when leaders show courage.
name is Ryan Wilson, and I'm just going to tell you my story. Ever since I was little, I wanted to play football at the highest level possible, and then luckily I was blessed enough to get the opportunity to play at D1 FCS Presbyterian College, and before I even got there, the COVID vaccine was pushed against me. It wasn't required, but it was highly recommended. If I wasn't going to get it, I would have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 2 times a week to get tested for it. If I come positive with it, then I have to get quarantined for 14 days. Not even if I can't test positive or test negative afterwards, I would still have to be in there for 14 days. So I was like, okay, I'm 17. I'll take the vaccine. Nothing should be worried about it. I took my first dose in June. July was my second dose. By September, I was in my room, wasn't able to move. Muscles felt like they were deteriorating. Even though eventually that was the truth. I stepped foot for 2 games, but after the 2 games, we had 11. I did not step foot on the whole rest of the season. I sat out the whole season. And by December, I was so sick, I went from 330 pounds to 250 in December. So then my mom was like, there's something wrong with you. We went to the hospital, was there for about 7 days, and they sent me home, said, you were fine. I got back. I actually weaned off the steroids I was on. That was helping my inflammation. I was like, I'll go back for another year. And that other year came. I actually went and played. I wouldn't say normal. I was taking medication. I was taking about 15 pills a day every morning, more at night, and it was just really hard. I actually ended up playing and actually starting 3 of the games that season. And that season after that, when it was winter workouts, so December to January, I was like looking around my teammates, and I was like, I can't compete with these kids that are healthy. So I called my mom. I was like, I have to do something about this. I can't keep going playing. And so I decided to hang them up, and then that's when it even went down more hill, because I stopped playing, stopped trying to take as much pain relievers I was on, and that's when I ended up just getting worse. I actually couldn't even dress myself at one point for at least 2 or 3 months, and luckily I have my mom here that helped me through the whole thing. And then I think it was in September, this clinical trial came. It was for MAS, microactivation syndrome. It was basically my immune system was producing more cells than what it should be doing, and it was tearing my whole body up. And then so I went in there. I was lucky enough to get the numbers for the trial, and ever since then it's been a year now. I've been in remission. December 11th, I was a year with no sickness, nothing. So I'm lucky enough to get done with that. It's just been a grace, blessed to God. All the people, I had to go to Gainesville Shands. It's the only place around here that would do it. And it's been a blessed opportunity to do it. And ever since, when I went in there, it took about 5 days after they got the trial, got the medications in me. I have 3 different types of infusions. Actually, this morning I did one of my infusions this morning before I came here, just to be my top shape for you guys. And it's just so crazy. It's just something simple like a vaccine that just changes somebody's life to become from healthy to worse, just because you just think it was going to be affecting you, but it actually is affecting your whole life. And even now, I'm enrolled in college now. It's just hard to even want to go to an in-person class, because you don't know what other people have, or because I'm immune compromised now for probably the rest of my life. It's just hard to even pick if you want to do classes in person, because you don't, and then some classes require it. But I was just trying to, as hard as I can, and just trying to move forward with my life. And I'll let my mom talk about the rest.
Yes, he is immune. My name's Cassie, and I'm Ryan's mom. He is immune compromised. He was diagnosed with mixed connective tissue disease with MAS, and the MAS was what was really deteriorating his life. It was he had congestive heart failure. He had liver damage. He has kidney damage. He had rashes all over his body. He had calcium oozing from his elbows. He had calcium deposits all up and down his side. He had it coming out of his back. And they kept telling me, I'm crazy. I'm the crazy mom. I'm like, the only thing that my son got was a COVID vaccine. My son has had a physical, been with the same pediatrician from day one that he was born until he turned 18, and then he went with our medical doctor. We have history. He had none of these symptoms until he got the COVID vaccine. That is when everything was taken away from him. We've had 3 years. It was just awful what I had to deal with my son. I had to help get him dressed. I had to help get him out of bed. We got lift chairs for him. He had a wheelchair. He couldn't go to the gym no more. He squatted over 500 pounds like it was nothing. On February 2nd of 23, he called me, "Mom, I can't compete with healthy." He was crying, I was crying, because that was his dream. If you knew this boy, football, that's all he lived. That was all he knew was football. And it was taken from him because of a choice that we made, because it was the government, everybody telling us, hey, this is what you need. You've got to have it. He didn't need that. He didn't need it. He had COVID before we even got the vaccine. He was fine, but in order for him to compete, that's what we thought he needed. And thank goodness I finally got in with Shands. Dr. Sobel and Dr. Modica was godsend for us. They got him on the clinical trial, and it was gamma-phantom infusions. He was in the hospital at Shands for 30 days. When we went into Shands, he could hardly walk. He couldn't move. He was really bad. The doctors would try to push his leg down, and they could. He had nothing. He had no muscle, no anything. And after that, he just got better. We were able to wean him off of the steroids. He was on high-dose steroids for 3 years. He has permanent scars on him from what the steroids did to his body that will never go away. They're there. His adrenal glands were put to sleep. He was sent home with me. I was given a shot that if he went unresponsive, I was to give it to him and call 911. Nobody should have to go with that for something that they did not need. He didn't need that shot. That was just, it was awful. It was terrible for us. Imagine what he's went through, but now he's on the upscale. I'm so proud of him. He's still enrolled in college. Hopefully, he'll graduate next year. And I mean, that's his story. And, and I appreciate Mr. DeSantis for helping, talking to his doctor, Ladapo, for reading my email. I appreciate it. Because his story needs to be told, and if it saves one life, that's one life less that has to live through that, because nobody deserves it. Thank you.
With Ryan and Cassie, as a mom, I mean, there's nothing worse than having to feel like you have to go through something like that, especially when you said your boy did not need that, but you felt compelled to do what you thought was right at the time, given the guidance, and you guys have been through hell. But your resilience, I think, is a model to so many people. And you coming out and advocating and stay strong, I think, is really something very powerful in this state and, frankly, for the country. So what you're doing is awesome. The Surgeon General said it a second ago, but, I really do. I just have to say how much I greatly appreciate the governor and the Surgeon General for standing up and having an immense amount of courage during that COVID authoritarianism. Because I remember the likes of Dr. Fauci. And by the way, I always thought about, this is July 2020, right? And this is the midst of the pandemic. Why is this guy sitting on the cover of InStyle magazine with sunglasses on, arms crossed, next to a pool like it's the Emmy Awards? I mean, and these guys are here fighting for your rights. And I was thinking about, Dr. Fauci and some of these other bureaucrats who were unelected. They were trying to impose their unconstitutional and unscientific will upon the people from on high in their ivory towers. It was through fear and the bully pulpit that they, at that time, were forcing these states to lock down. Their guidance were locking our children out of schools. Small businesses were shutting down, but yet at the same time, they were saying, oh, the big box stores, they can stay open, they get a pass. But the little guy who spent 30 and 40 years building up this institution, blood, sweat, soil, and tears, everything that they tried to do to create this business, they were being told by these bureaucrats in Washington, you've got to shut down. They advocated for these ridiculous mask mandates, smothering 4-year-olds. Do you remember that video? Did you ever see? His name was Mason. I remembered it as clear as day because we have a son, Mason, and he's getting ready to go to kindergarten. And they are doing everything in their power. And this boy is screaming his head off because he doesn't want the mask on his face, and they are trying to smother him with this mask that was an ineffective, inefficient piece of cloth. And then, of course, they bullied Americans into taking an experimental COVID mRNA shot contingent upon them keeping their job or even being able to engage in society. That was wrong. Florida stood in their way, and the governor was right. He stood, as you all remember, as a bulwark against the insanity, and I feel compelled to come out here to talk about this because I witnessed this day after day after day. For months I witnessed this because you would watch, we'd wake up, I'd turn on the TV. I stopped doing that after a while, but the legacy media was hitting him every day of the week and twice on Sunday. But he did something that was so powerful. He armed himself with the data, the evidence, and the truth. And he went out and he fought on behalf of us every day. And he stood up for our God-given constitutional rights to life, liberty, and happiness. And that, in my opinion, as the Surgeon General said, is the very definition of having courage and strength. And because of his leadership, I think and I know that he helped change the trajectory of this country, and he saved this state from irreparable harm. And that really brings us to today, right? So I don't come here today just as the First Lady of the state of Florida. I come here today as a mama of an 8, 6, and a 4-year-old. And it is absolutely ridiculous and unconscionable that at this point, with what we know about the mRNA COVID vaccine, and frankly what we don't know about the COVID mRNA vaccine, that the CDC would still put this on this shot still on their recommended vaccine list for our children. And I think that that is an utter disgrace, and I think that they need to take that down. This should be evidence-based, not agenda-driven. The CDC loses further credibility when their recommendations are not justified by all of the available evidence that we're seeing. So I look forward to continuing to work with our great Surgeon General. I look forward to working with the legislature to ensure that the mRNA mandate is permanently banned in the state of Florida, and that vaccine status is not used as a way to discriminate against our fellow Floridians, whether that is a mom who's being kicked out of her pediatrician's office for vaccine status, or a patient who's being denied a medical procedure because of their vaccine decisions. It's a matter of right and wrong, and as a mama, I'm happy to stand up here in front of you and fight. So God bless you.
Well, I can tell you, when we're doing things, when we're leading on different issues, and you take a stand and then you deliver a product. In this case, when we said you can't force the mRNA shots back in 2021, you believe in what you're doing, of course, but then you get feedback continually. And on this issue, I have people come up to me to this day saying, if you had not done what you did, I would have lost my job. I have people that say that if you had not done what you did, my kid would have been irreparably harmed. And so we were doing the right thing then. It's time to make sure that these protections are permanent into law. We also don't want to see Florida be a situation where you've got some kid that's deathly ill and they're saying that he can't get a transplant or medical treatment because he didn't take some flu shot. I mean, how absurd can you get? We don't want this to be guided by what's best for the pharmaceutical industry, what makes people money. We want to be judged and guided by what's best for the actual patients, for the kids and their parents, and for individual patients that are doing things. So this is important. We need to act. We did the right thing in 2021. We need to make that permanent. We need to expand those protections. And I look forward to being able to work with this new CDC under new leadership, working with RFK Jr. to bring the rationality back, return to evidence-based medicine, and make sure that that carries the day. And I know Florida has been a leader in that already. Surgeon General Joe Ladapo has been a big leader in that. And wouldn't it be great if that was the ethos that prevailed all across these United States? Okay, do we have any questions?
Governor, the Surgeon General mentioned that there may be more measles cases. If so, how many and where? And also, what can the state, or what action can the state do about any of these cases?
Joe is the man to answer that for you.
Yes, let
me just pull out my crystal ball here. No, I don't know how many more cases there are going to be. I say that because measles is extremely contagious. I mean, it's probably one of the most contagious viruses in existence. So, there's one confirmed case in South Florida. There may be others. And in terms of what we do, we've already had some communications with the school that the young girl attends, and we've provided information about options that parents have. One of those that's very important is just communicating that their preferences and choices for their healthy kids are going to be respected. So, a year ago we had some cases of measles down in, I think, Brevard County, and many people had kind of a cerebral event when we said that if a kid is healthy, whether that kid is vaccinated or not, as long as the kid's healthy, the kid can go to school. It's up to the parents. And we're saying the same thing now. We also have measles vaccines available in that part of the state for any parents who want them. So that option is there also. And we provide some education there. So there may be more cases, and we'll continue providing education and resources. Also want to say that vitamin A, as I know my friend Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been taking some heat for making a recommendation around vitamin A, but that's completely a good idea for anyone who is severely ill from measles. It's a great idea. You take it as recommended. You can do it with your physician. You don't take it for like weeks and weeks, but 2 days of vitamin A, which is the recommendation, there's some evidence for it. There's really no downside to doing that. So that's absolutely a good idea for anyone who's more sick from measles.
Governor, how soon will the Florida DOGE task force audit local governments, especially after a Hillsborough commissioner failed to get other commissioners on board?
You tried? None of them wanted to do it? None of them wanted to do it?
Two more wanted to do it.
Okay, so you had three. Out of 3 of 7?
3 of 7.
Okay, well, that's not bad. That's not bad. I mean, Hillsborough's come a long way from where you guys were 5 or 6 years ago on that. So we are going to, in fact, I'm just working on having kind of the leadership team at the state level that are going to be our DOGE team. So that's going to be, that'll happen soon. We are talking with vendors because remember I said the key for our state agencies, we've already been doing this for our contracts and things like that. So when they find these DEI stuff what Elon's finding, we've been scrutinizing this stuff anyways, and that's just as a matter of course. And sometimes we've had to, if you have to cancel, you have to cancel. We also have the lowest number of state employees per capita in the entire country amongst all 50 states. And so if you look at the federal government, obviously it's a lot of largesse. We run a very tight ship at the state level in Florida. Our budget, even though we have millions of more people than New York State, is less than half of New York State's budget. So we're doing well. But we want to do this for ourselves just because you want to do 100%, right? You got to do as good as you can. But Florida is kind of the model. The feds have been terrible, so they need it way more than we do. But we did think what Elon is doing, using artificial intelligence and some of the tech stuff, let's bring that into our reviews of the state agencies. So we're going to do that. We're also going to do the DOGing of our universities because I think that there's largesse, right? Just since I've been governor, I think their budgets have almost doubled. There's been a huge increase. And I honestly got sticker shock when I saw that. I'm like, I approved all that? I was like, all right. And look, they're doing good. We have 3 in the top 50 for public, 4 in the top 50, including USF here in Tampa. And we're proud of that. But at the same time, we really want to do. So those are really the two that we have the most control over. Now, on the DOGing of local governments, I have some authority to go in and get some information. Constitutional authority and statutory authority. We don't think that's enough, and so we're asking the legislature to provide us with the ability to send DOGE teams down to county and city governments, being able to go in there, rustle around, see what's going on, and then show this, because a lot of the stuff that's out is very opaque. If you're just a conscientious citizen trying to make sense of all this, honestly, it's not easy to do. So I think there's going to be value in that. So we will be doing some stuff soon with local government, but I think the main event will be once we get some additional statutory authority. And I think we just want it to be for a limited period of time, and we don't want this to be a permanent thing. Kind of want to do it now. We obviously are having a debate about relief on property taxes, and people say, oh, well, you know, where are you going to get this money? But the reality is they've increased their budgets a lot lately. And because they assess your property higher, they take more tax from you. They say, we haven't raised tax rates. They haven't needed to. Because if you have the millage, what it is, if they're saying your house is worth 20, 30% more, well, you're going to pay more. Even if you have a homestead, it doesn't provide you full protection. So we're going to be doing all that. And I think if the legislature provides some good ability to go, that'll be really important. And we would want to do that immediately upon that being enacted, and then really use the balance of 2025 to be doing that. But I think people are pinched. They're getting pinched with these property taxes. I think they're starting to ask more questions about, okay, why am I paying so much more every single year? And some counties have had population growth. Here has had population growth. I understand that. Honestly, I think I just read that this area is one of the leading in increase in home values over the last 5 years. I think they said like 58% increase. Did some of you see that article? I saw a little blip. I mean, you don't always know what you can believe anymore, but it's true. It rung true to me. Well, on the one hand, 58% increase in the value of your home, that's your main asset. You're now wealthier. But on the flip side, if you haven't actually sold it, it's an unrealized gain, but yet they're still going to tax you at the higher price, even though no one's ever actually offered you that much, or there's never been a transaction for that much. So there's all that goes into it, but I think the doging of the local governments will help provide a lot of good information so that we can, make these decisions in 26 on the ballot about, what's the proper role of government to tax your private property. When I go to Best Buy and I buy a big screen TV, I pay tax, and then I come back and I put the TV on my wall and I use it. I don't have to keep paying tax on it all the time. It's a private piece of private property, and yet you buy a piece of land, you have a house, even if you have no mortgage or anything like that, you constantly have to be writing checks to the government. And so the question is, do you really own your property at that point, or are you basically just paying rent? And I think a lot of people are like, at what point am I free and clear? I'm willing to work hard. I'm willing to do whatever. I'm a hard-working taxpayer. I understand we got to do, but at some point am I going to be free and clear? And we've got a lot of elderly in Florida who bought their homes many, many years ago. Now they're assessed at some extravagant amount, and they're getting hit with higher taxes, and I think that's wrong. All right, well, this is important, this issue today, so I would just ask everybody that's here and everyone that's watching, I think there's a lot of support in the legislature for this, but contact your state legislators, your state senators, let them know that we've got to eliminate the sunset provision. We have to provide permanent protection against these mandates, and we need to update the Patient's Bill of Rights to have the non-discrimination so that they can't kick you out of your doctor's office because of vaccination status. Thanks, everybody.